Hello, good afternoon, everyone. So nice to see you again, and I hope you are all safe and healthy wherever you are. So today is the seventh day of International Week. So indeed, time flies, and today we will have another amazing speaker. So we'll have Dr. Heyvon Herdhayinta. She is currently a lecturer at the Faculty of Economics and Business, Universitas Gadjah Mada. She earned her bachelor in economics from the Faculty of Economics and Business, Universitas Gadjah Mada in 2010. And then Master of Science in Business Administration from Agder University, Norway in 2014. And Doctor of Philosophy from Macquarie University, Australia in 2021. So she just came back recently from Australia. We will have great insight from her about the role of corporate governance in a disruptive era. I'm sure that you have met Dr. Heyvon before because she was the moderator as well for several sessions before. So without further ado, Dr. Heyvon Herdhayinta, the time is yours. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Luluk, for the introduction. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Heyvon. Welcome to IWEEK 2022. Okay, so today I would like to deliver this session, and the title is The Role of Corporate Governance in a Disruptive Era. My name is Heyvon. You can call me Heyvon or Bu Heyvon. Before we are going further to discuss about corporate governance, I would like to ask, please, yeah, okay, thank you. I would like to ask several topics about corporate governance. Have you ever take any class or course before about corporate governance or corporate governance topics, perhaps? Anyone? No, not yet? Okay, thank you. Anyone knows about what is corporate governance? Before? Not yet? This next, thank you. Perhaps this one, CSR, corporate social responsibility. Is it more familiar, perhaps? Anyone knows about what is CSR? Perhaps from the on-site participants? Perhaps others? What is CSR? Yes, please.
So according to what I know, corporate social responsibility is a way for companies, corporation to give back to the society, to the community by in the form of many things. Actually, they can do donations, they can do social actions, they can do like healthcare program for the society. So corporate social responsibility, according to what I know, is the way for companies and corporations to give back to the society. Thank you, ma'am.
Okay, thank you. Mas
Devin.
Wevi. Okay, thank you. So Mas Wevi already explained about CSR. Any other answer?
I'm Jilan, and I think just to add on to Devin's answer, I think it's like you're giving back the community, but in a way that doesn't necessarily have to be for profit. So I think it's completely doesn't have to be for profit. So it can be like philanthropic activities, maybe charities. For example, if you were for example, Nestle, you would build a school. Doesn't necessarily have any revenue streams in the end, but you're doing something for the community, something like that.
Okay, thank you so much for the answer. Philanthropic activities. So company giving back to the society, but still with certain objectives. So actually, both concepts corporate governance and corporate social responsibility are very close. They are very similar. But in this case, CSR is a part or one mechanism of corporate governance. So corporate governance are broader, wider, like more wide concepts. Next, please. The next one. Can someone answer what is the difference between shareholders and stakeholders? But you know, right? At least one, perhaps just explain one of this. Perhaps, or perhaps online participants?
Excuse
Okay.
me, may I try?
Sorry. So I think shareholders are people who own the company, so who have equity over the company. If you're an investor or if you're like the CEO, for example, you have a share. But stakeholders is not only that, but it's also everyone else who's maybe affected by how your company operates. So, for example, you have like people who don't necessarily have to be stakeholders to be shareholder, but all shareholders are stakeholders.
Okay, thank you. And your name is?
Jilan.
Jira.
Jilan.
Jira, okay. Thank you. Mas Jira answer and explain about the difference between shareholders and stakeholders. He's right that shareholders are the owners of the company. Perhaps another term is stockholders. If you are more familiar with stockholders, shareholders, owners, and stakeholders consist of more than only shareholders. So shareholders is one aspect of stakeholders, but stakeholders are broader. For instance, suppliers, customers, community, government, NGO, they are stakeholders. So beyond just the owner, beyond just shareholders, there are wider parties affected by the operation of the company, and they are stakeholders. So up to this point, have you understand the difference between shareholders and stakeholders? Okay. Okay, the next one. Anyone ever heard about agency theory before? Yet? Okay. The next one? This is the last one, the fifth concepts about BOD or BOC. Perhaps the first one is more familiar, board of directors. Anyone ever know about what is board of director? Is it the first time for you to heard about board of a director? Okay, how about director? Only director. Ever heard before? Well, yeah, please, Mas.
Okay. So I think directors are the one that you can maybe call them a supervisor, or they are below the chief rank or the commissioner rank. So board of director I think that they are below board of commissioner.
So they're similar, both BOD and BOC.
Nope. BOD is lower than BOC.
Sorry, which one?
BOD is lower than BOC.
Okay, okay. So, okay, thank you. And then perhaps CEO, anyone knows? I'm sure you have heard before, right? CEO. So CEO is a part of BOD or BOC?
BOC.
BOC?
Yes.
Are you sure?
BOD.
BOD. So, okay. we will learn about this in this session. So I'm just checking whether you already have existing understanding about corporate governance concept. So don't worry, we would like to proceed to the next slide. When we are talking or discussing about corporate governance, actually there's no one single universal definition about what is corporate governance, because this concept is very broad. But here I take one definition from OECD, that corporate governance involves a set of relationships among a company's management, its board, its shareholder, and other stakeholders. Corporate governance also provides a structure through which the objective of company asset, the means of attaining those objectives, and monitoring performance are determined. So this is a formal definition, but the simple definition of corporate governance is related to or about how companies are governed, how companies, corporations are governed, managed, organized. So it's relatively broad definitions. Once again, there's no single universal definition. It's just related to how company manage, govern, organize, monitor. Okay. And before going further, discussing about corporate governance itself, we need to discuss about agency theory. Why? Because agency theory is the most important theory and the most influential theory of corporate governance. Agency theory explains the management of relationship between principal and agent. So these two words are the keywords, principal and agent. So who are the principal and who are the agents? Okay. The first one, principals are the owners of the company, or anyone who hires someone else to do a certain job at their expense, because the owner pay the management to run their business. The next one, agents. Agents are managers or management. So a person hired to do a certain job in exchange for an agreed compensation. So there's compensations. There's contract between principal and agents. To be able to understand these agency relationships, we may take this concept not only in a company, but also in our daily lives. For instance, of course, we know shareholders or owners are principals, and managers or managements are agents. Because the owner asks the management to run their business, and they got compensations. The management got compensations from the owners in form of salary, compensation, bonus, or other benefits. But for instance, in our daily lives, these principal agent relationships or this agency relationship is also applicable. For instance, if we go to a doctor or our GP, general practitioners, do you think who is the principal and who is the agent? We have patient and doctor or the GP. Who is the principal and who is the agent? Yeah, please.
I think in this case, the customers are the principals and the doctors is the agent, because the customers, in this case, if you look in the definition, is the owner or anyone who hires someone else to do a certain job, and in this case, the customer pays the doctor to do their job.
Thank you so much. It's correct. So the customer or the patient, we pay the bills, and then the doctors do the examination and the medical checkup on behalf of us, the patient. In this case, both in our daily life example and also, let's say, in a company, the principals may not know 100% whether the agents already working or do the job according to the best interest of the principal. For instance, we just go to the doctor and the doctor says, you need to take this medicine and this, so on and so on. We don't know whether it's the right one or not, perhaps. Of course, hopefully it's always the right one. But for instance, the principals, they ask the managements to run their business. They don't know 100% sure. What are the managements doing in their daily operation? Is it already in the best interest of the owners of the company? No one can guarantee, right? So whenever in a contract, one party therefore needs to monitor the other parties and find ways to ensure that interests are aligned. For instance, it is normal, I think, for instance, in doctor or any other consultant service, if we want to take or find second opinion, for instance, just to make sure. That's in the example of our daily life. But in company or in a business like this, company, we have owners, we have management. This is the role of corporate governance and why and how it may start. Due to the conflict of interest between principals and agents, or in another words, between owners or shareholders and management. This conflict of interest may lead to specific problems. For instance, it is possible that company managers or the managements maximize their wealth at the expense of shareholders. The example is like this. For instance, CEO. CEO is a part of management, BOD, as one of your friends already mentioned. And they work in a certain company on behalf of the owners or shareholders. While they are working, they want to maximize the facilities, the privilege that they can enjoy. For instance, instead of using ordinary flight, they choose of using private jet, which is luxuries, perhaps not necessarily important, just because the CEO or the management want to enjoy the privilege and the luxuries. Of course, this is at the expense of the owners or the shareholders, right? Second problems that perhaps you already or ever learned in any other subjects that it is possible that management or the managers, they are working and try to achieve only short-term objective. Let's say short-term profits. Let's say just annual profits. And sacrificing long-term objective. Because let's say the CEO, the management, perhaps they only work for several years. They are not going to stay forever. That's why they tend to, improve the performance of the company, especially the financial performance of the company, only for short term. Their objective is only for short term and not for the long term objective of the company, which is not good. And also, the third problems that may arise is that the difference between managers and shareholders' attitude to risk. Okay, before I'm going further, anyone is from accounting? Any other decide? Okay. This topics is pretty much, it's actually like in the middle of accounting and also management, actually. So in accounting, risk is good or bad? Perhaps from accounting side, but I think it's also applicable to other background. Risk. Shall we take risky project or shall we just let it go? Perhaps others also want to say something? Oh, I'm sorry. So someone, risk is both good and bad. That's true. That's correct. If I'm not mistaken. Yes. So what is good is calculated risk. So we cannot be excellent without taking any risk. But too extreme risk is also dangerous for the survival of the company. So in this case, for instance, can you imagine that usually management, let's say the CEO, they are set a certain profit, and after they achieve this profit, they will get certain bonus, certain amount of bonus. It is possible that, after reaching certain level of that profit, they don't want to take any risky choices. Just because, they already take enough risk and they just want to play safe. Even though this is not on the best interest of the owners. Okay. Can I read the chat? Okay. The nature of risk. Yes, it depends on the nature of the risk. Thank you. Okay. The next one, after we discuss about agency theory, is that there are two types of agency problems or agency conflict. We already discussed about agency theory itself and the problems that may arise. And at least there are two types of agency problem. The first one is type 1 agency problem and type 2 agency problem. Type 1 agency problem is what we already discussed before. It's also known as owner-manager problem that arise from separation of ownership and control between shareholder and managers or management. While type 2 agency problems, we haven't discussed about this. This is also called principal agency conflict or agency problems that discussing or explaining the conflict of interest between controlling or majority shareholders and minority shareholders or non-controlling shareholders. To make it easier for you to understand, perhaps one example of type 2 agency problems is what they face in family firms, family business. Perhaps if it is also relevant in SMEs, small medium enterprises, especially when they are owned by family. How can it different between the problem that we discussed before about owner and management problems as in type 2 and how it can be different with type 2? Because in a family business, let's say family business or family firms, the owner are the family. We call it family owners. So they are the majority owners. They are the controlling owners as family owners. Perhaps most of you from Indonesia or perhaps from Asia. In Asia, we have lots of family firms, family business. Also in Europe, for instance. The problem or the main problem is like this. The controlling owners or family owners, especially when the company or the firms are listed, for instance, they are publicly traded. And there are, other investor join as minority shareholders. So they just, owning or having just small percent of the total ownership of the company. So they are minority shareholders. In this case, they rely on the majority shareholders, the family owners, to run the business. Although, perhaps the family owners, perhaps they are not always 100% doing the business or running the business in the best interest of the minority shareholders. Anyone here invest in stock, for instance? Perhaps in IDX, Indonesian Stock Exchange? You have? Okay. So our friend here, we can say that he is minority shareholders. For instance, if the company that he is investing is a family firms or a family firm, so our friend here as minority shareholders invest in a company with family owners as the majority shareholders or the controlling shareholders. Okay, before I'm going further, any questions? Is it understandable? The step. Can we next? because I think this perhaps because I think this perhaps relevant with your immersion program, I would like to explain a little bit more about family business. How's your immersion program? Is it progressing? Have you started already? Okay, good. So I would like to explain a little bit the difference between family business and non-family business or any other form of corporations. What makes family business, family firms are unique? One of them is this SEW or socio-emotional wealth. What is socio-emotional wealth? So socio-emotional wealth is defined as the non-financial and emotional benefit of doing business that meet the family's effective need. So for family owners, business is not all about financial, not all about profit-oriented. It's not all about money, for instance. They have this kind of concept of socio-emotional wealth related to, like the emotional aspect of owning and running the business. Perhaps you may imagine, or perhaps one of you already have your own, starting your own business. And perhaps, you identify the business is more than the profit itself, but it's like perhaps becoming your identity, for instance. And we go next. 5 components of SEW or socio-emotional wealth are family control and influence. For family owners to be able to, operating the business, running the business, influence the business, it is important rather than just the profits, for instance. Family identity. This case is for family. Or perhaps if it's just one person, can be, personal identity. Family identity and reputation. If you are a founder of a business and the business like really identified with you that much, perhaps until it becoming part of you, a part of yourself. Social ties with your community, for instance. Emotional satisfaction. By operating, by running the business, doing the business, you get this sense of emotional satisfaction. I'm having the business and I'm running a business. The brand is using my name, for instance. And also transgenerational succession. Succession here, what I mean is, like passing the business from the parents to their children, for instance. Sometimes even from their grandparents, for instance. Passing the business beyond generation to the next generation. The next one? Okay. And for family business, socio-emotional wealth is the primary reference point. So for family business, they kind of facing dual reference point. So socio-emotional wealth and economic or financial or profit reference point. Does it make sense? if you imagine yourself having a business or running a business, sometimes the profits, financial aspect is not what matter the most, right? Anyone here, perhaps having a business, starting a business? If you have any question, please do not hesitate to interrupt me. So we are moving to discuss the aims of corporate governance mechanisms. What is the objective? What is the aim of corporate governance? Corporate governance exists to ensure that managers work in the best interest of the shareholders, as I mentioned before. But this is the shareholders as a collective overall, not just certain or let's say majority shareholders, but the shareholders overall as a collective. The next one. The next. Oh. Okay. The next one. Corporate governance exists to minimize, to mitigate agency problems that we discussed earlier. And also, corporate governance set framework for contractual relationships, how to align the interests of principals and agents, the parties. The next one. And in the end, construct a sound economy. So there exists a wide variety of governance mechanisms, internal and external. Now that you already hopefully understand the problem that they face in the corporations related to the agency problem, do you have any idea what kind of mechanisms may work to align the interests of principals and agents? Someone want to try? Try? How can we align the interests of management and owners in this case?
Sorry, ma'am.
Hi, Jovan.
Hey, ma'am. Maybe I will try, ma'am. Maybe, ma'am. Maybe
Yeah, please.
So I think the first thing is we could see at where every time a CEO doing an annual meeting or a monthly meeting with the board of a director or maybe the board of the shareholder, every time they go to that board of a meeting, they will discuss some of the mission of that CEO and align it with the mission of the shareholder. I think some of that is like that. And another things in terms of management level, in terms of internal management level, we can use something like an performance indicator, like for example, a KPI or logic model or performance balance card. I think those two are some of the things that can do mitigate this problem in an internal organization, ma'am. Thank you, ma'am. I think that's my opinion.
Okay. Thank you, Jovan.
Okay, so I think another thing that I will personally suggest is that like an important thing is of course to make a contract between management and the CEO, and maybe revenue sharing or profit sharing would be beneficial so that the managers are not to ensure that the managers brings as much as profit or revenue as much as possible to what the shareholders expected him or her to work on.
Thank you. Monitoring. And then mission, communicating, and also managing performance. Those are among corporate governance mechanisms. So there are so many corporate governance mechanisms. Even, let's say, regulation from regulators. Regulation are external. Most that you mentioned, your friends already answered, perhaps more like internal corporate governance mechanisms. Let's say laws. They're external. Any other idea? What kind of mechanisms to best align the interests of owners and managers, for instance?
Okay. Hi. For me, I think it's because also in the previous we were also talking about the family-owned businesses. I think because family-owned businesses sometimes, because well, you know, this it's not as strict usually as like big corporations. I think in a way, those businesses don't really have a clear vision or mission. And sometimes, even if they do, the members of the family sometimes they don't pay too much attention of that. I think one of the way is like sort of making sure that everybody kind of understands where they're trying to go with the business, and this can also be applied to bigger companies through other techniques such as like leadership, where as in like the main idea of how the vision to which they will try to kind of spread put onto the like the subordinates like that. And I think that's one way to make sure they all have the same idea.
Vision, you mentioned vision, right? Yeah, vision, mission are important internal mechanisms of corporate governance. Can we go next? That perhaps, I don't know, like someone's mentioned boards, I think. Okay, so board or both board of director and board of commissioners. Boards are one of the most important corporate governance mechanisms. Why? One of your friends already mentioned about monitoring. And who is monitoring the management? Who is monitoring the managers? One aspect or one mechanism can be the board or the board of directors. Board of directors becoming a central and a very important corporate governance mechanisms, and even sometimes it's even synonymous with corporate governance itself. So in every problem that we discussed earlier, the role of monitoring is very important. Here, for instance, performed by the board of directors. I already mentioned monitoring. So there are at least two pivotal or important roles of boards, the boards or the boards of directors. Monitoring, of course, one, and advisory. In this case, for advisory, board of directors also play a role for becoming supervisor. I think there's one of you already answered about supervisor of the company. If there's one employee and usually, you know, they have supervisor to supervising this employee, but who is supervising the whole company? It's a board of directors. Next. And during this pandemic situations, it is urgent to help company to survive, of course, but in accordance with the right track. So board of director, they need to supervise, direct, accompany the company because it's their responsibility to do so. Related to the board of director, there are two board systems we know in the world. Next, please. One tier and two tier. So one tier or unitary board systems are used in UK, US, Anglo-Saxon countries, and India. So the board of directors consists of executive and non-executive. The non-executive directors are independent directors, usually. Executives in a company are the management who run the business. CEO is executives. Two-tier or dual board systems, such as in Indonesia, Europe, for instance, in Netherlands and Germany, they have two board systems. The first one is supervisory board, and the second one is management board. In Indonesia, we call the management board as BOD, or board of director, and supervisory board BOC, or board of commissioner. So the board itself, both in unitary or dual board system, they may also form committees, forming committees for certain tasks and to deal with their many tasks in more efficient manner. For instance, they may form an audit committee or nomination and remuneration committee for nominating either CEO or top managements, for instance. Next. So in this disruptive era, why I write it as a disruptive era? Because corporate governance is important, not only this in the situation of pandemic situation that we are facing right now, or even the post-pandemic situations, but for any disruption event, for instance, technology is also a disruption, for instance. And also, for instance, during crisis. So during turbulence time, during pandemic situations, the role of corporate governance, board of directors, and monitoring are increasingly important. Board of directors needs to ensure that company stays on the right track. Business environments are rapidly evolving. Perhaps you're already familiar with these terms, VUCA, volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity are rapidly growing in today's business environment. Main task of the board is to make sure that the company operates to maximize shareholders' value, or in another word, the company runs for the best interest of the shareholders or the owners. Here we are talking or we are discussing about profit-oriented company. Perhaps it can be different in another form of organizations, for instance. Why corporate governance? This is the last slide from me. Why corporate governance is important during this pandemic situation? First, due to the increasing demand of stakeholders, especially when the companies are listed or publicly traded, because they need to maintain their transparency and accountability. And also I mentioned before about regulators, because they need to provide and develop infrastructures, for instance, and also related to the crisis, any disruptive condition, any disruptions, for instance. So why corporate governance is important? Because enhancing transparency, accountability are important. Or in more simple way to say, it is important to monitor the company, whether it's a big company, whether it's just, let's say, small company, family business, for instance, family business. It is also important to monitor parties involved, the principals and the agents, for instance. Thank you. Any other question, perhaps?
I'm sorry, ma'am.
Yeah.
If I may, if I have a question, ma'am, if I may, I want to ask 2 questions, ma'am.
Sure.
So the first question is previously, Ma'am Heyvon explained about the tier 1 of the upper level system. In the tier 1, like for example, in the USA, they use executive and the non-executive. Yeah, I want to know the executive one is like the CEO, and then the non-executive one is something that I really don't understand, ma'am. I think that's first question first, ma'am. Thank you.
All right, Jovan. Thank you. Yeah, it's a good question, actually. I don't have many opportunity to explain further. So when we say the board, it refers to board of director. And board of director can be using 2 systems that I mentioned before. It can be 1 tier and 2 tier. What Jovan asked is the 1 tier, like in US. So in US, they don't have board of commissioner. They don't have. They only have 1 board, and it's called board of director. To answer Jovan's question is to explain more about the difference between 1 tier or unitary board system and 2 tier or dual board systems. So in the US, it's just 1 board, and the name is board of directors. They consist of the executives. The executives are the management, let's say CEO, CFO. They are executives. They run daily business of the company. But for instance, the Ph.D, they also hire independent director from outside the company. Let's say, someone important or executives from another company, for instance. So they are being hired and becoming independent director in that particular company. So they are independent. They are not, doing the management, not involving in day-to-day business operation. They are external parties. The non-executive or the independent director. This is to distinguish with what we have in Indonesia. We have BOD and BOC. BOD or board of director at the management. They run the daily, CEO, CFO, president, director, for instance. They run the business, the daily operation of the company. But for instance, they may also have commissioner in Indonesia. We have commissioner, or in bahasa Indonesia, komisaris. Commissioners can be independent. For instance, like the owner can be one of the commissioner, for instance. But we also have, we don't have a whiteboard yet, but we also have a independent commissioner from outside the company. Perhaps you ever heard news. For instance, celebrity, they are hired as independent commissioners. You ever heard that they hire celebrity also for becoming independent commissioners? For instance, Cinta Laura, I heard, I read news that she's becoming independent commissioners or some company, for instance, something like that. So the commissioners or the board of commissioners, they are mostly like supervising or monitoring the company. They are not involving in day-to-day or daily business operation. Perhaps they can be outsider or any other parties. Jovan, is it understandable?
Yes, ma'am, it's understandable. And maybe for the second question, ma'am, before the second question, maybe I want to have a confirmation. There is a board of director and there is a board of commissioner. Board of director is the one who monitor all the company performance. But is it true that, just for confirmation, maybe I'm wrong, is it true that the board commissioner is the one who oversees the board of the director? Is it true, ma'am? Before I get to the second question.
Yes, it's true.
Okay, ma'am.
So they are monitoring the company as a whole, but also monitoring the board of director.
I see. So for the second question, so basically one of the highest ranking people is the board of the commissioner, since they are the highest ranking of the company, basically, even though they are not really the one who organized the company. Who is the one who choose the board of commissioner, Mel? Is it the majority of the stakeholder? So basically the majority of the stakeholder, is it the one really the one powerful of the company, sir? Ma'am. Thank you, ma'am. I think that's my question.
Okay. Thank you so much, Jovan. Actually, I was thinking of giving you an exercise, and perhaps Jovan's questions, it's also best being answered by doing this exercise. But to use the time more effectively, perhaps you don't need to be divided into groups. Just what you should do is now searching for any annual report of a company, any company, whatever the company. Just use your search engine in your laptop and type annual report of any company, by using or observing directly in their annual report. It is easier for us to analyze and to understand their corporate governance mechanism. Going back to what Jovan's asked, who is the highest rank? We have CEO, we have BOD or board of director, we have board of commissioner. Sometimes we also have what's being called as president director, chairman of the board, president of commissioner, perhaps. like so many, highly officials. So could you please now searching for any other or any companies and look at their annual report. By looking at their annual reports, perhaps you may search the section of board of director. Or perhaps they also have section for corporate governance, for instance. Or even easier, organizational structure. Hopefully for the online participants can also participate, searching, opening, and looking. Just put one example of annual reports for any companies. Doesn't matter. Perhaps from the site participants, on-site participants, have you already opened any company? Which company? Yeah. Coca-Cola. Can you find the section when they present their structure, for instance, board of director or board of commissioner? Is it there? One already find the section? Yes, please.
So for me, I googled the annual report for HP, Hewlett Packard. Over here, it states the first of all the transparency for the board of directors nomination. Also the nominees of the board of directors along with their skill set, and below it has the qualification, how they selected, how they're structured, organized to, how they contribute to HP themselves, and I guess that's what's in the report.
Can we go back to the upper one? Any other participant? How about Jovan? Oh, sorry.
Well, I'm sorry, ma'am. Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Oh,
Have you opened? Sorry.
Oh yes, ma'am. I found it. I think it's really good, ma'am. The annual report by the Indofood CPP, ma'am.
Okay, good.
So
good example.
Yes, ma'am. It is a good example. So I will share the link in the Zoom, maybe, ma'am, if I may.
Okay. Is it possible to share Jovan's screen?
Oh, I'm okay. So,
No. It's fine. Maybe just click the PDF perhaps.
so it is in the page 13. So it is basically the structure is very easy, I think. In the page 13. Yeah.
13 or 30?
13, ma'am. 13.
Okay, 113. Okay. Good example. Why? Because this is this is the.
I think from this we can know that the highest is, I think, board of commissioner, but at the same time there is an audit committee to help the board of commissioner. I think that's it, ma'am. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jovan. This example is very clear. One more thing why I like this example, because this is a company firm. Sorry, this is a family firm. If you see, among the board of directors, they have the same surname, meaning that they are coming from one single family. They have BOC or board of commissioner. They also have BOD or board of director. And if you remember, I've explained before that the board may form committees to assist their tasks better. And in this case, they form two committees, audit committee and nomination and remuneration committee. Sorry, can we go up before the page before this? No. Yeah. This one. This is the shareholding structure of a company, of this company. If you may notice that only less than 20% are traded for public. The rest are belonging by the family owners. Can we go down again? The page earlier about the structure, management structure. I think it's this one. If you also notice the division here, they are top management. They are top management. For instance, like VP or vice presidents or SVP or senior vice presidents in charge for certain division or certain function of the company. Treasury, marketing, R&D, legal, HR, or human resource, they are top management, whose names are written here. Go up a little bit. Management structure. Yes, management structure. Yes, this one. If you notice further, put more detail into the detail, they write the independent commissioner in bracket. For instance, Adi Pranoto Leman is independent commissioner. And also Bambang Subianto and Timotheus. External independent professional, independent commissioner, and so on. Franciscus Welirang is the president commissioner or the chairman of the board of commissioner. Do you think why is the reason they write here that this person is independent? Why? Why they need to show, why they need to present that this person is an independent party?
Maybe, I'm sorry, ma'am. I'm not really in the, if I may, ma'am, maybe I'm not really in the accounting, but in the economics, ma'am. But I think in the accounting, there is an terms of independency, ma'am, I forgot in the accounting there is an independency factor. So basically, this is the audit committee. When we do an auditing, independency is very important. So that person doesn't have any relationship with the company. For example, Anthony Salim is basically on the first Pacific Palace in Hong Kong, and that Pacific Palace company is also on ECPP. So there is a relationship between the company. So that is why the audit need really independent, ma'am. So that's the basic of auditing. Thank you, ma'am. I think that's my
Thank
opinion.
you. Thank you, Jovan, for your answer. We already discussed about agency problem, agency conflict, all the problems that we discussed earlier. And we expect corporate governance mechanisms to minimize and mitigate the problems. One way is to monitor the company. And if the parties that is monitoring the company are not independent, can we trust, can we believe those persons monitoring the company are going to perform, act on the best interest of all stakeholders, for instance, or the best interest of all parties? Independency is very important, as what Jovan mentioned, answer. Because we may have higher confidence, we may put our higher confidence if the parties monitoring the companies are independent parties, rather than, a member of the member of the family owners, for instance. Of course, if they are family owners, perhaps it's not always, but there's a chance that they will prioritizing the interests of the family owners. But if it is independent parties, the independency, the quality of the monitoring process perhaps would be and should be better. Any other question? Oh yeah, please.
Okay. I would like to ask about the corporate governance. Is it okay, ma'am? Okay, so thank you for the opportunity and the great presentation. I would like to ask a simple question. Does corporate governance responsible for the corporate culture, ma'am? Or maybe what is the correlation between the two of it?
Sorry, may I clarify it once again? Did you mention corporate culture?
Yes, corporate
Yes.
culture.
Good question. Do you think who is responsible for corporate culture? Other answer, please.
Ma'am,
So,
maybe from my perspective, I think all of the employees, maybe all of the employees that works in a certain business that is responsible to maintaining and the company culture.
of course, they need to perform, to act in line with the corporate culture. But who set the corporate culture? Is it the responsibility of, outsider or the insider of the company? Perhaps you ever heard about this term, tone at the top, the tone at the top. Who set the tone at the top? For instance, the corporate culture are prioritizing integrity, honesty, and then accountability and transparency. So, they really put integrity first. Who is responsible for this? For setting and for communicating to the rest of the organization that integrity is important. Is that the responsibility of outsider? No, right? I can see some of you like, that's the responsibility of the insider, the management, top management, from within the company itself. The role of CEO or let's say top management, the highest rank of leadership in management is the CEO. So CEO direct the company to any other, objective the company wants to achieve. So the answer is it's within the company, either top management, CEO, and if we connect back to the example, will be the part of board of directors because they are management board. They are responsible for running the business day-to-day basis, daily operation of the business. That is their responsibility. For something related to the operations, we rely much on management board. But for something related to monitoring, oversight, for instance, we rely on independent parties or external parties. I can see John answer here in the chat box. The CEO should be the key mover of corporate culture. Yes. The CEO is the highest rank in the corporate management. So they should be, responsible for so many things. Any other question? Perhaps we still have. Okay, please.
Okay, thank you for the opportunity and thank you for the great presentation. Maybe my question is a bit related with the question from Jovan. I just want to know, is there any specific industry that should to use the one tier or the two tier board system, ma'am? Thank you.
Any? Do you mean that we can choose something like that?
Yes, ma'am.
No, it's we cannot choose. So it depends on the system that is being used in that particular country. If I'm not mistaken, there is one country. It's the Netherlands, if I'm not mistaken. Give the options. It was like years ago. I'm not sure. I should check. But mostly for most other country in the world, they just need to follow the rules, the regulation set by that country. For instance, maybe any of you are familiar with laws. We have common law, civil law. We cannot choose. In that country, for instance, they use common law or they use civil law, we just follow. So it's part of the regulations. Or if you remember earlier, I mentioned that external corporate governance mechanisms, the regulation.
Okay, thank you, ma'am.
Perhaps, okay, perhaps one last question. I think we have question here. Is it a question or in the chat box? Oh, okay. How can multinational firms Thank you. Perhaps this last questions from John. Good questions. How is the case for MNC or multinational companies? So usually they need to comply to the regulation in which country their stock are listed. For instance, if the company they publicly traded or listed their stock in Indonesia, then they should comply with Indonesian regulations. But for instance, let's say we have also Indonesian companies who are also listed their shares or their stock in the US, for instance. In that case, they also should comply with corporate governance mechanisms or regulations or requirements in the US. That's perhaps one simple answer. It could be also, for instance, depend on the headquarter. For the holding, for instance, or for the subholding, they may follow the regulation or the requirements in those countries, for instance. But also in the end, for the holding or the headquarter, they also need to follow the regulation in that country where the headquarter is located. Okay, Azra. One more question
Okay.
from Azra.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you for the opportunity. Is my voice audible, ma'am?
Yes.
Okay. So for the first question, is there any drawbacks on implementing the corporate governance in business nowadays? And second question is about how does the government or any other stakeholder observe or keep track of any company's corporate social responsibility? Thank you, ma'am.
Sorry, I didn't catch the second question.
It's about how does the government keep track of the company's corporate social responsibility, ma'am.
Okay. Thank you so much. So there is a trade-off between implementing perhaps too many or several variety of corporate governance mechanisms between the cost and the benefits, of course. But mostly, if it is beneficial, it's better to apply. One thing that is important, perhaps I forgot to highlight. Corporate governance is not law. It's not mandatory. Law is mandatory. But corporate governance is, the basis is comply or explain, mostly. So you need to comply, otherwise you need to explain. So it's different between corporate governance, mechanisms, regulations, and laws. But of course, for certain, let's say, like for instance, we have FSA, financial and in Indonesia, OJK, they or perhaps in the US, SEC, for instance, the regulators, of course, they have regulations that we need to follow. Perhaps it's then becoming more like laws. The next question is about, keep track of CSR. So one thing to easily monitoring CSR is that we can see CSR activities, philanthropic activities in their annual report, because company, they are demanded to report CSR, corporate social responsibility, in their annual report. Perhaps if you still have your annual report with you, you may also observe, other than the company they are presenting the corporate governance mechanisms, they usually also disclose their corporate social responsibility or CSR or philanthropic activities in their annual reports. For stakeholders who want to, learn more, to know more about what kind of CSR activities that company already committed. Okay, Azra, was it answering your question?
Yes, thank you, ma'am.
Okay, perhaps we still have more time. Perhaps this is the last question. So I will read the last questions from John. The moment. So John asking about activists in nature. Is it related to NGO? Are you asking about NGO?
No, it's not about NGOs, but rather ESGs, that is environmental, social, and governance. Then in making firms to become more activist. Consider that the activist board members they are mandating firms maybe to invest their funds in sectors which they deem most fit than what is good for the shareholders.
This is returning back to the company itself. So in doing or operating their business, in running their operations, they should keep in mind that it's not only about profit oriented. So they also need to take care about environment, social, and governance. So this issue is very important. Why it is detrimental? Because company cannot manage well. And as long as they can manage, for instance, like always reporting their CSR or ESG activities, and also maintaining and complying with the regulation, that should be fine. Okay, I think it's enough for these sessions. We already passed the time. Okay, once again, thank you so much for your participation.